everybody. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney, and I am thrilled today to have in the studio two awesome women, entrepreneurs, businesswomen, family in a sense. So I want to introduce to you Catherine Morrissey and Susan White Morrissey. And here I want to tell you a little bit about them because Susan, let's start with Susan. Susan White Morrissey, she founded the company White Morrissey, whose beautiful wrap I am showcasing today. It is not a promo. I do buy these on my own. Anyway, she started this nearly 3 decades ago, redefining luxury knitwear. Her daughter, who's also with us, Catherine Morrissey, now leads as president of the company and is carrying Susan's legacy forward through a really recent, bold rebrand that's both modern and still deeply rooted in the brand's DNA. So together, they've turned a family business into a masterclass in continuity, innovation, and heart. So I want to welcome Susan and Catherine. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Sure. And just a little bit, because I love to brag, I've known Susan now for I guess we met each other during COVID, when times were difficult in business, especially like if you're in any sort of retail business like they are, but also in the business that we had so much work in schools and everything immediately closed down. And I found Susan's voice in the middle of crisis so helpful for me personally and so full of like wisdom and of seeing things from a different perspective, and really has become a mentor to me as well as somebody that I really truly love. So Susan, thank you for being here. And I just also want to tell you that she is the co-founder and CEO of White Morrissey. It is a New York City-based luxury knitwear. If you have not seen White Morrissey's products or been to it, you should. If you can't feel them, go onto the website. You'll see the new work of what they're creating, and it's quite wonderful. She launched it in 1997 with the goal of making cashmere accessible to modern women. Over nearly 3 decades, she's grown the brand from a smart wholesale venture into an internationally recognized label known for its craftsmanship, integrity, and timeless design. So before founding White Morrissey, she spent 20 years mastering every side of the fashion business, from her early days as a buyer at Macy's East to leading women's sales at Fenn, Wright, and Mason and Bollinger Gold. And in 2015, she took ownership of White Morrissey, paving the way for its next chapter and mentoring the next generation of leadership, which is her daughter. And one of the things that I found so cool about their relationship is how they lead, watching them, how they lead as a mother-daughter duo. You don't see much of that in business. And so it's really great model, I think, for so many of us women out there. And so I've invited them today to talk about that. So let's talk a little bit about Catherine real quick, because Catherine also serves, like I said, as president. She really leads the brand's modernization strategy. So in digital transformation, which we've seen in retail have to go so much towards that digital innovation. A lot of companies haven't been able to do that as well as you guys have. And so I'm interested in hearing about that too from you, Catherine. But since stepping into her role in 2018, Catherine has guided the company's evolution from wholesale to vibrant, direct-to-consumer powerhouse, right? And in their recent rebrand, she's bridging that kind of classical luxury with contemporary sensibility. Catherine began her career at Calvin Klein as an assistant merchandiser and associate designer before returning to her family's company. She brings a fresh, data-driven, design-led perspective to the legacy that her mom built, leading with curiosity, collaboration, and a deep respect for the women who came before her. So Catherine and Susan, again, welcome. And I'm going to jump right in to some questions so that we can get the most out of our conversation with you. So Susan, let's start with you. You've led White Morrissey for, like I said, nearly 3 decades. So take us back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that original spark that inspired you to launch this brand, because you had a very successful career before this. So what made you want to do this?
It was a phone call. I love telling this story because it's, for some people to hear it, it's so random. But one of my friends who I admired and is a mentor of mine still today called me and said, what do you think about this idea? There's a guy in China who has a lot of cashmere and he wants to figure out how to make a business and ship sweaters to the US. And I thought, well, I don't know anything about cashmere, but It was for me, a challenge of a lifetime. I wasn't working at the time. I was in between jobs and I said, sure. And I figured out how to write a business plan, put it together, and everything else that comes along with a startup. It was fun.
Oh, I mean, just to take that opportunity from one phone call says so
Yeah.
much about, who you are as a person, and also really good note for all of us that are sitting there going, how do we create this life or this business? Sometimes it's as simple as just saying yes to an opportunity out there. That's so cool. Catherine, when did you, see yourself first joining this company? Because that, I imagine that probably growing up, you weren't always thinking this was your path. What was that moment for you when you thought, okay, this is something that's of interest to me?
Yeah. So I didn't grow up thinking I would join the business. This was really not something we ever talked about, believe it or not. But I always had a love of fashion. I was dressing myself from the age of 6 and always had like a real sense of style. So that was a huge part of me growing up. I went to Syracuse for art and design and thought I was going to be an artist, what I thought I was destined to do. Clearly, I pivoted, started my career at Calvin Klein, like you mentioned. And it was years later, after being at Calvin for 5+ years, that I realized that everything that I was naturally drawn to in terms of design and creativity and product strategy actually all lived inside of White Warren without all the corporate layers. Truly, the timing just lined up. I was ready for a change, and there was an opening for a merchandiser at White Warren. And so I felt like I had established myself enough and I could bring something to the business. And I called my mom and kind of picked her brain about it and told her I really thought I could help. And I believe she hung up and thought about it and then called me back and said, okay, let's give this a try. And looking back, it's funny how casually this came about because it's really changed the course of both of our lives.
Yeah. I love that it's both of you, your stories are phone calls. You know what I mean? Like how powerful. Phone call. Let me just call. How was that conversation on your end, Susan? Like when she called you, were you surprised or were you thrilled?
Yeah.
Like what was going on?
No, totally surprised. We had just had a recent change. She didn't know about it. There was an opening and it's great the way it happened. Yeah, because the creative team, I told the creative team about the call and they were like, finally. I mean, we've wanted her to come over here for years. This is ridiculous. This is great. Can she come over tomorrow? Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
So did you start off, Catherine, as a merchandiser and then like learn different parts of the business or?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then how did you move? Like, did you know when you got there, you said, this seems like an opportunity for me. And like, did it just kind of organically come about or?
She made it happen.
I would say I just kept asking for more.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm writing that down. I mean, I cannot tell you. I just was listening to that yesterday. Like how many people just don't ask, like just ask, right? Ask for more. I love that.
I think my mom probably has the track record of all the emails of like, okay, I'm at this point. This is what I'd like to do next. Can I take this on?
I love that. So how do you, I think everybody out there always wonders this, if you don't come from a family business, I think one of the things we always wonder is like, how do you balance family roles and, and these executive roles? Like, do you have any like hard lines or like things that you won't cross or ways that you get learned to like norms that you have that help you so that you have still a good relationship in your family life as well as at work?
I always had the ability to let it go when I left my office and went home. And so I never talked about business at home. And it was just family focused, totally. And never really. And then, the kids would go to bed and then I'd get out my legal pad spreadsheets because everything was done by hand. So it was just natural for me to not bring it home. Yeah.
Right. So that
I was good at it. Some people say I'm really good at compartmentalizing, and I think that's probably true. And that's how I managed it.
Catherine, what about for you?
And I'd say she's absolutely right. Like even today, when we're together with family, extended family, she really tries to play the role of mom and grandma and not CEO in that space. And I really appreciate that. There are times when we blur the lines and work will end up coming into our personal lives on some level. But it's, if we're together with extended family, it's usually not us bringing it up. And if it is her and I, we're on the side talking about it. We really try not to talk about it with anyone else around, not to be a distraction. because the time that we have is so precious because, we both live very, very busy lives. And I would say it goes both ways. We have a catch up once a week, and every once in a while, we're spending half that conversation talking about something personally because that's what we got to get done that day. That's just who
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah. Well, what have you learned? And I'll ask you first, Catherine, and then I'll go to Susan. But what have you learned from watching the other person lead? I'm kind of envious when I hear you guys because my mother, I grew up watching my mom in business, but we did not work together. But I always think about like, oh, I wish I could have, now that she's retired, I always think, oh, I wish I could have watched her lead in the moment and wonder what I would have learned. I learned a lot from her leading in our family, but I wonder if it would have been different watching her at work lead. And I was curious, Catherine, what you've learned from watching your mom lead. And then, Susan, I'll ask you what you've learned from watching Catherine lead.
I have learned resilience from her. She built this business through so many different eras of retail, and I've gotten to be a part of some of that. And all the while, she never stops adapting, just keeps going, has never quit on hard days, just pauses, problem solves, and figures out what the next step is. So I've learned that from her. You can't quit on the hard days. You just gotta keep going. And I would say also to trust my gut more. I tend to be more methodical and to think everything through, maybe overthink things at times. And in this industry, like instinct matters so much. I've learned from her just sometimes hear it in my head. Don't overthink it, Catherine. Just don't overthink it.
It does sound like her. So that's awesome. Susan, what about you? What have you learned from her?
Well, since we went work from home, remote started for us March 12th, that famous year of the pandemic. I had to learn to keep my mouth shut because, the team that we were building, the leadership team, didn't need to hear it from me. They needed to come to it themselves or hear it from Catherine, really. And I come to things quickly because I've done it forever and they haven't. I muted myself. That's what I learned. Put yourself on mute, literally. And then I think I'm always curious and I ask a lot of questions, and that doesn't work for probably half the people in the world. I learned by asking questions. Some people don't like being asked questions. So I stopped doing that too. Patience. She's much more patient than I am. So I've learned to be patient and keep my mouth shut.
What a wonderful thing to teach your mom. Catherine, come teach my mom. Mom, if you're listening, I think you're very patient. Okay. So Catherine, let's shift to the rebrand because I saw, Susan, I saw the ads and I was inspired watching them, right? As I consider myself a New Yorker now, and watching them, I felt like part of New York. Even though I don't know if I fit your exact demographic, but I felt like it, and I felt like somehow this kind of luxury cashmere would in some ways keep me that young New Yorker that I still imagine myself to be. And I was curious, Catherine, because we haven't talked about it, but what that kind of 2025 rebrand, including changing the way that you write your title, right? It used to be white plus, like the little plus sign for Warren, to an ampersand now. So I was curious what story you were hoping to tell through this new chapter at White and Warren, because it is so impactful, I feel. So
I will say something about the ampersand, and then I'll kind of tell you the full story.
Okay.
So the ampersand, aesthetically, we thought it looked nice. We've always called ourselves White and Warren, not White plus Warren. And a lot of people that weren't close enough to the brand were referring to us as White plus Warrens. Felt like this was a natural change. And also, Susan always likes to say yes and, to have us thinking about yes and no buts. So it felt natural in that way as well. The rebrand was really about giving White and Warren a clear identity. We've always been known for quality, timelessness, longevity, but we weren't telling a cohesive, emotional story about who we were because we didn't need to. And times have changed and evolved, and the demands have changed in terms of where we needed to meet the customer. And a big part of this chapter was bringing forward the New York point of view. That's always been a part of the brand and never really fully expressed. We've always been rooted here in New York City on Bryant Park as a New York cashmere brand, the New York cashmere brand. And there's an energy and confidence and modern sensibility and nonchalantness that comes from being built here in New York City that we really wanted to show up in our marketing and our creative. And at the same time, we really wanted to be able to protect the essence of what my mom built: timelessness, approachability, everyday luxury. And the goal was to really just express those same values that hadn't changed and weren't going to change in a way that felt modern and reflective of how the woman is living her life today. It wasn't about reinventing ourselves. It was about clarifying who we are. The visuals, the tone, the storytelling all needed to have a modern softness and a New York edge to it to speak to both our longtime loyalists and the younger customer that was really discovering the brand and is discovering the brand for the first time.
Yeah. I love that. How did what's that creative process that you go through to ensure that rebrand does honor those long-term customers while also attracting kind of this younger audience? How do you break that down a little bit for us? Because I think sometimes people want to do that, but we don't always know how that translates, you know?
So in order to figure out where we were going and who we were going to be, we went backwards. We started from the beginning. Susan and I were interviewed to really understand the story, the why, what drives White and Warren, the ethos. And then we did a lot of customer data. So everything that we came to was really driven by the customers that we have today, that we had a year ago when we were going through this process and doing surveying. So that we hired a company to do surveying to understand what mattered most to them so that we could make sure that was still coming through in how we were evolving the brand. And, this is really about an evolution. This was not a revolution.
I love it. Not a revolution, but an evolution. That's a great tag. Susan, what about for you? I love that. First of all, I've never heard the yes and part to the story behind the ampersand. And we here at Stepping Into Your Leadership are big on yes and. So I love that. And I was curious, maybe that's the answer to this question, but was there where were you in this rebrand in terms of trusting this next generation's vision for something that took you 3 decades to build up? Were you nervous? What happened in that process for you?
Well, I learned a very long time ago that one has to allow the creative process to begin, obviously create a strategy, to evolve, to change and learn. You have to trust the process. Beginning of it was to interview firms, which I wasn't involved in. And then when they picked a firm, it was fun because we got to talk about it. And I was comfortable with the firm that then talked to me, talked to Catherine, talked to us and did their deep dive. The story's pretty simple. It's not complicated and I'm very direct. So they got a lot out of me about the past, but I'm not about a history lesson. I'm not ever about that. I'm always about now and next. And I was more curious about, okay, let's go. And some of the ideas that were presented that were unbelievable, I never would have even considered, right? But you have to lean into it and be open to hearing why and how, and meeting with the artists. There was a woman who actually created you would say the font, and it was fascinating to me. So you have to embrace that creative process to understand why they're doing it, what they're presenting, to then eventually pick your favorite new logo and understand and believe in the story that they're going to tell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, what an honor to be able to go through that process.
And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't that long, the process. I didn't feel like it was too long. I was excited to be asked to be involved in it. And I have complete trust in Catherine. Her aesthetic is far better than mine. And so, I went with that too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
I would say this is something I never had to convince her of. And that openness in her is I believe, really how this 28-year-old brand has stayed relevant all these years. She's always open to change.
She is. And I have to compliment you on this, Susan, because you mentioned it earlier, and I want people to hear this because I think that this quality is something that not enough people really cultivate, and that is your curiosity. I feel like your curiosity keeps you evolving constantly. I see it, Susan and I are in a business group together, and I see it all the time. She digs in on something and she'll question and question and question, and then you see her change. Immediately, once she's asked enough questions, then she's like, okay, Like, let's think differently. And I find that so inspiring because so many people use their curiosity as a way to just convince everybody of their points. And I find that you use yours to really challenge your own mindset. And I find that it really helps everybody around you and to watch that process if you can relax through it. Some people get nervous, right? That, oh, wait, what's happening? But I think that it is really such a gift to remain curious. And I bet that rebranding was fun. I mean, what a fun thing to do if you are curious and want to really know and open to change. So that's a little bit about something very recent that was a kind of more creative process, although certainly important to the business. But I'm just curious, like, how do you, and I think a lot of people out there that imagine running a business, whether it's with their husband or with their father or whatever it is, like, how do you approach decision making if you disagree? I have to imagine that there's some things that you disagree on. How do you go through that?
I approach it differently than Catherine does, I think. If I disagree with something, I want to talk about it right away and dig in and understand why we're disagreeing or what the mindset is behind one philosophy versus another, and talk about it immediately. And that's my way to handle any situation, whether it's personal or business, or if I'm shopping in a store and someone, disagrees with me. I'm asking questions all the time. Catherine, much like her father, is let me think about it and let me take some time. And so, I've gotten better with everybody in my life. If they don't want to get into it right away, just waiting and being patient. Yeah. But figuring it out by talking through it, whether it's immediately or over time, is the only way to a positive resolution. I hate to say it, but I think we agree on almost everything. I do. And I know that comes from me completely trusting Catherine. I do.
So, Catherine, what about for you in terms of decision making? Do you find, I mean, that must be interesting with working with your mom, right?
Yes, because we're so different. We lead very differently. We think differently. She was talking about how she is more instinctual and quick and kind of just keeps moving and asks questions. And I'm much more structured and deliberate. And I need to take a minute. I need to think about it. I will say that I believe that really balances each other out. It ends up making us and the business stronger because we really have that balance. So that's a good thing because we lean on each other that way. She pushes me to move faster. And I believe that I get her to slow down sometimes and appreciate that we need to think things through a sec before we just act. Ultimately, we always talk every decision through and we come to the answer somewhere in that back and forth. We know that we've aligned and we move forward.
And then do you feel like for your teams that work for you, where do they fall in that? Are they always looking at like both of you, or how has that evolved over time? Because I imagine that would be kind of tricky sometimes too.
Well, the philosophy would be never to keep anyone waiting for an answer. And we both agree that that's, as leaders, how we behave. I always say nothing happens before it's time. And if it's not time, you got to wait. And then there's unforeseen life issues that come up where a decision can't be made. Something happened with us this week with someone and you just wait. It's not a big deal, but you need an answer. Who cares? We're not reporting to anybody else. It's just us. Life comes first. Family comes first. And decisions sometimes need to wait. Yeah.
In this year in particular for your industry, I would imagine that the tariff situation was a real moment of stress or moments of stress. In those moments where that came up, was there any lessons that you guys had in terms of how you work together or how you approached that? Because I feel like so many businesses I've talked to over this year are really, in some cases, still struggling with that. But I saw you, in terms of the resiliency, I saw you guys kind of pivot and move pretty quickly through that process. But that's just as an outsider. Is that true? Like, how was it for you?
Well, it's 8 months so far, and there's no end in sight as long as the leadership is still there. And the most difficult part for me was watching the team, but more importantly, watching Catherine navigate through it. And that was me as a mom, not as a leader. It's painful. Catherine, how would you answer that?
Most of our leadership team was with us through COVID as well. And I believe they built a little bit of a playbook through that time because none of them had really lived through anything like that. But going through that together, when tariffs hit, I just watched the team sort of fall. Like they knew what to do, how to act. The morning calls that we needed to have, the late night calls that we needed to have at the factories, like everybody just sort of got going and we did not lose time. So I believe that we benefited from having the same team go through something a few years earlier and then be able to really know what to do in that moment.
I mean, honestly, what a gift to be able to look at the pandemic and all of the struggle that we went through, but to have a team with you still, I think says a lot about y'all's leadership and your, tightness that you have together. But to look at that as the gift that helped you through this new challenge and still helping you through this new challenge, that I think a lot of us aren't respecting that, because we so look at those negative things that happen as negative, as bad. We don't want to go through that again. But in some ways, it prepared you for this. I find that really inspiring. I truly am. I think that's cool. By the way, I know I hadn't meant to ask you that, but I found that cool for me to think about too. So thank you. You both are mothers, right? And as a mother myself, I'm always curious. Mothers, when we look at ourselves, it is a leadership role within the family, but sometimes it's like, how does motherhood shape us as leaders when we're building a culture within a business? So often our models in the past generations have been male businesses, right? You think of people whose sons take over the business and so forth. And I'm just curious about starting that conversation about motherhood and how that kind of shapes the culture that you build. And is it different generationally? I don't know. Like, do you think about that? Do you have a lot of young moms that work for you?
We do. We do. And I would say that motherhood has made me more grounded and more clear in what really matters in any given moment. It's taught me boundaries and the reality that I can't be everywhere at once. And that actually has made me a better leader and more relatable, I believe, to there are a lot of women in our organization that have kids, and to see me modeling what it's like to lean in to work or having to be with the kids and balancing. This is a funny word because it's hard to find the balance, right? But doing the best you can, doing it all makes me more relatable for them.
Yeah. What about you, Susan?
My mother, her name was Sue. She was probably the best role model for me for everything in life with regards to leadership and people. Dealing with people, because she managed all of us differently and was always in tune to each child, different personality, different age, different everything. And she was always about the individual. She didn't handle us or treat us or love us the same. She loved us as what we needed, and my parents were both, do whatever you want to do. Let's go. Yeah, try it. And you want to go to New York when you're 17? Go for it. Yeah, and that was, I guess it was the 50s and the 60s, but they never clipped my wings. They always let me fly. And I will say that for me, in this business and in all the other businesses that I've worked in since, it's been quite a few years, I love watching people develop, whether was my kids, and I still love watching my kids develop, and they're grown-ups now and parents, but it's always been about the individual, the unique personality and what they need. And I think that's one of the, skills that I bring to the table when it comes to the company too. I can sense and lean into what somebody needs and be empathetic and help them figure out what they want. And that's the fun part for me. And the numbers, of course. Yeah, the development of the business.
And the numbers.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the number.
Yeah.
My father always used to say the numbers don't lie. So it's the people and the numbers.
Yeah, that's great. What's next, Catherine? What's next for White and Warren? Do you know? Or are you just in the next? What's next? Yeah.
I would say growth, but thoughtful growth. We are really modernizing how we operate across the business, expanding our reach and consumers, like we talked about, and trying to build a brand with real staying power. That's the goal.
Is there I know you have young daughters, but would there be hope that the next one of you would be in that business? Do you have any
It's funny that
Hopes.
you asked that question because I was thinking about that in the context of this podcast. My older daughter, Shay, is 9, and I believe because of COVID, once again, I work from home a lot. I'm here a lot. So she sees me working a lot more than I ever experienced my mom working. So she feels more of this connection to the brand on some level, I think. And she asks me quite often what it would be like to work at White Warren, what she would do at the brand. She did a fashion show a year ago at a birthday party, and somebody sent me a video. And she walked down the aisle and they said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And she said, "I want to work at White Warren."
Oh my God. Well, there you
Yeah.
go. There you have it. I mean, that's cool. Inspiring. Even the next generation. Who knows? Go Shay.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. I want to end today we usually do this. I'm going to throw it out to you guys, but just a couple of tips, any sort of actionable tips. And we can, when you think of them, we'll just share them. But like a tip that you would have for somebody that was thinking of going into business, because we have a lot of folks that listen out there that are, maybe in that corporate world wondering like, do I take that phone call? Do I try something different? Or wanting to start a business with somebody that they know, either a close friend or a loved one, and any sort of tips you would have for folks starting out in terms of how to navigate this relationship and the business world.
My first and only tip, I guess, is the discovery period. And most people don't understand what that means. Discover everything you need to about the industry, the business, the niche, the market, whatever you want to call it. Whether it's a service or a product business. And I had to call upon some close people, friends that had experience in marketing and retail research. I wrote a business plan. I didn't know how to do that, right? For me, it's just about the people and the numbers. But I gathered a group to help me put together the business plan and understand the market that we were thinking about getting into. So
I love it.
The discovery period. Yep.
Discovery process and a discovery period before you jump. That's great. Catherine, you got one?
I would say don't be afraid to fail. Fear of failure is what's going to keep you from doing it and to stall you out. You need to fail throughout the process of starting and going and building a business in order to grow. You have to take risks to change and evolve.
I love that. And it reminds me of the ad that I saw in your rebrand where the woman who looks so cool and so New York is walking in her beautiful sweater and she's walking her dog and she gets kind of caught up in the leash, a little bit. And I just remember loving that moment and thinking like, God, can't we all relate to that moment? That moment of like, taking on this big world, and having all these things tripping us up literally, but kind of doing it with style and, panache and thinking like, okay, I could do this. I love that. I love not being afraid to fail, just getting out there, taking on this new venture or whatever. And then having also that discovery process, like what an interesting mix of things, right? Both fear that trying to make sure you're not afraid, but also really looking at the numbers, looking at what's out there, getting people's opinion, being curious. Like you said, those are two great ways of looking at this. All right. Well, boy, you guys have given me a lot of food for thought today. And again, I'm just so inspired by how the dynamic of your relationship, how you balance each other in the workplace, how that affects, I've had the pleasure of working with their company a couple of times and seeing how your energies do really, flow and balance each other as much as one can balance, right, Catherine? But, and how that does have a positive effect on the rest of your team. And so if you guys have not checked out the beautiful work that White and Warren creates, or you haven't been able to put it around your neck or around your torso, please do. Check out White and Warren and all the wonderful work that Susan and Catherine are doing for not only business, but women-owned and operated businesses and mother-daughter businesses. So, and maybe granddaughter someday. So who knows? Poor Shay, 9 years old. And we have said this is what you're doing. All right. Anyway, I love it. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.